to start today in chapter 2 of Hebrews. And as we look at each chapter, there are some questions being handed out right now, but I decided early on, because of the book itself and because the book is, some view the book as difficult, so I thought it would be better if we talked about the chapter first, then went to the questions. So we'll follow that pattern with each chapter that we look at. Turn to Hebrews chapter 2, starting at verse 1. Therefore we must give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. For if the word spoken through angels proved steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard him, God also bearing witness both with signs and wonders, and various miracles and gifts of the Holy Spirit, according to his own will? For he has not put the world to come, of which we speak, in subjection to angels, but one testified in a certain place, saying, What is man that you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you take care of him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in that he put all in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. But now we do not yet see all things put under him. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. For both he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly I will sing praise to you. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, here am I and the children whom God has given me. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. For indeed he does not give aid to angels, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham. Therefore in all things he had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered, being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted. Okay. Transitions. We have two styles that are being presented in this book. Exposition, where you have text, points, explanation, analogy, and exhortation, where you have correction, encouragement, warning, review. So those are the two styles in the book. We were supposed to be looking out for transitions, characteristic words, like so far in chapter 1, we've seen a repetition of the word angel, things about angels. If you see the same characteristic word throughout a passage, it starts to make sense that that passage hangs together somehow, that passage is all of one. And so when we make our attempt to interpret a passage, we use characteristic words to see if that passage all hangs together. There's the style or genre, which I mentioned up here, exposition or excitation. There is use of pronouns and nouns. And then there's other transition words, and like, for instance, for, and, those kind of words, and other words as well, but, therefore. And then there's inclusions. We looked at, in one sermon, Pastor called what I call inclusions, he called it a grammatical sandwich. And, you know, there's a slice on one side and there's a slice on the other side, so that when you start to look at the passage, you can say everything between these two slices is about the same thing. It's about the same subject. It hangs together. So these are the little tools that we're using in order to begin to decipher the book of Hebrews. So now, as we look at Hebrews chapter 2, what can you tell me about the chapter? Let's start with the first section. What would you say is the first section of Hebrews chapter 2? Okay, and why would you say that, Gene?
The topic seems to be focused on His Word and how it's delivered to us.
Okay. Any characteristic words or any of these tools that we can use to tell that it's a section unto itself? Anybody? Shelley?
Chapter 1, because it starts out with 4.
It starts out with 4 or therefore. Okay. What's the style? That's true, because we were always taught that when you see the word therefore, you're supposed to ask yourself what it's there for. And so it seems to point back to chapter 1. We'll talk about that in a second. You're right. Therefore is also a transition word. So there's either a minor or major transition from the subject matter of the first chapter to the subject matter of this particular section. What else can you tell me about that small section?
Keywords: heard, spoken.
Okay. Characteristic words.
All words focusing on the Word.
Right. Okay. What can you tell me about pronoun use in the first chapter as opposed to pronoun use right here? Okay, so we're shifting now from the primary actor in the first chapter, who was God. The primary actor in the first chapter was God. The primary actor here is now we. Okay? The community of believers. So now, what are we supposed to do? Pay more careful attention. Okay, pay careful attention, pay more careful attention, and not drift away. Therefore, let's talk about that for a second. It's pointing back to the subject matter of the first chapter because it's basing this statement about being more careful on whatever was spoken about in the first chapter. So what is being looked back to? Why must we pay more careful attention?
Because it applies to us, it's not just history.
Okay, so it applies to us. So we're in the present now. Then. So there's been a shift also in tense. We were talking about the distant past. We talked a little bit about the future in chapter 1, but now we're talking about the present. We must pay more careful attention. And why must we pay more careful attention?
God spoke in the past through His prophets and eventually through His Son. And having spoken, now the transition
little section gives us a reason. Pay more careful attention, and the for or because is what?
He's talking specifically to Jewish believers who are trying to again establish the credibility of Christ.
Okay.
He's saying, goes on to talk about, or if it were spoken through angels, he's talking about the Mosaic law.
Right. Okay.
Time and again, Christ is superior to what people are, superior to Moses. He's again making the point. Christ is superior.
Right. He is. He is. In time past, we had a message through prophets. We had a message delivered by angels. But in these last days, we have a message delivered by whom? The Son, Christ Himself. Okay. So now, the Son is greater than angels, and this is an argument from the lesser to the greater. So, since the Son is greater than angels, and since the word that was delivered in time past was valid, how do we know? What does this particular little section say that indicates to us that we know the time past word was valid? Right, it was steadfast. And what happened to those who, right, right, exactly. So there was, appropriate reward for either obedience or disobedience, as the case may be. So that's the time past word. Okay, the time past word was to be obeyed, and if it was disobeyed, there was an appropriate punishment or reward. Now, if the time past was that valid and that steadfast that it brought an appropriate reward for obedience or disobedience, what then does the last days word require? Exactly. It requires more careful attention. This required careful attention. This requires more careful attention because of the one who is delivering that word. And not only that, but we didn't talk about it that much, but this phrase, in these last days, this author views Jesus Christ as the very culmination of everything that went before. Everything. What was that? Because He's the Messiah, okay? He is the fulfillment of everything. And as we look at this author's use of Scripture, we see that this author is using Christ Himself as a way to interpret Scripture, because he sees Christ as the very culmination of everything ever said and done before. So, sorry, I get a little excited. So then we're to pay more careful attention. Now, what happens if we don't remember? This author is including himself now. We've had a pronoun shift. He doesn't say you. He says we. So what happens if we don't pay more careful attention? Discipline. But what? We'll drift away.
The Jews constantly want to bring them back into the law.
Right.
Back to what he's trying to tell them. Christ is superior.
Right.
Don't drift away from what we told you. Don't go back.
So what are we drifting away from?
The old way, the old practice.
No, if we pay more careful attention, if we don't pay more careful attention to this last day's word, what are we drifting away from? Okay, something a little more specific.
Chapter 1, verse 14, that we will inherit salvation.
Okay.
Drifting away from salvation.
Okay, now I'll put that down. We need to discuss that a little bit because we need to talk about what drift away is, but also drifting away from the word, the very word. If we don't pay heed, we will drift away not only from this so great salvation, we will drift away from the word that we heard.
Which is that Christ is superior.
Right.
That is the message.
Right. We'll drift away.
Don't forget that.
Now, for those of us, there may be some of us here that actually have that, background, right? And this probably speaks volumes more. But to us Gentiles, though, what then would be the the parallel concept?
Well, anything that would keep us there.
Okay.
Really, I think that's what they're talking about.
Don't we also have old ways that when we're not paying attention, we also drift back to old ways that we need not to drift back to? So,
Non-Christian Gentile culture.
right, exactly. Non-Christian Gentile culture. Paul called everything in his heritage that did not lead to Christ, he called that all dung. So, we can do the same. We can do the same as Gentiles. We can do the same. So, the message primarily spoken to believing Jews in this particular book is very applicable to us. Drift away from salvation. Does that mean that you become unsaved? But why does that not mean that you become unsaved? And try to stay in this book. Try to stay in this book.
Salvation is both from the sinful life and the word simply deliverance.
Right. Okay.
So deliverance meaning if you are therefore saved, then in sanctification you're being delivered from the sin that associated besets you and keeps you from growing.
Remember, what did I say about the tense?
Present.
We're in the present.
Sanctification present.
We will drift away. Drifting away is a process. Okay? We will drift away. And James was touching on the same subject matter, more or less, because he was talking about deliverance on a daily basis. And so, you will drift away from possibility of deliverance on a daily basis if you drift away from the Word. If you don't keep the Word active in your life, you drift away from it, and you drift away from daily deliverance of your trials and tribulations, from the effects of your sinning. And so, that's one aspect. What's another aspect of drifting away from salvation?
You lose your joy, your warmth, your spark, your glow of imitating Christ, your fellowship with other Christians.
Confidence.
Courage.
Faith. Trust. Whatever.
How small do you think I can make this shot go?
We can say as long as we can rhyme.
See, if I had a whiteboard, each of these things would be in a different color, and you'd be able to. But we'll do with this for now.
So we'll pray for whiteboard.
Whiteboards are here, they're simply not installed.
Okay, we're gonna put them all everywhere. Instead of wallpaper, we're gonna have a whiteboard, and I'm gonna bring a big ladder.
All those library ladders so you can.
That's right. We're gonna put a rail around.
I know they have that wallpaper.
Why is it on?
Yeah,
Yeah, and get your rail so you can swipe it out. Yeah.
there you go.
David,
David's got the floor.
why is it that he describes salvation as this so great a salvation that you'll be drifting from? Why did he have
Okay,
to describe
so
that?
great, huh?
If he didn't intend for it to be just salvation, you'll lose salvation.
Right.
So great a salvation, he had to describe that.
You're right. Well, the idea is that salvation is so much more than just being delivered from punishment in hell. It's so much more than that. It's a salvation that not only takes care of our past, but it also takes care of our present and our future. And so that's why it's so great. That's one reason why it's so great. We need to think of salvation in a much larger way than we're used to, perhaps, by including not just the past and the present, but also the future in the whole package of salvation that's been delivered to us. That's one reason. Then the other reason is because of who delivered this message. That's why he's saying so great. Because it's delivered by the Son, who's heir, creator, redeemer, sustainer, and all those things that we wrote on the board last week. Okay. Anything else on that first? I'm sure there's more, but so this is an exhortation. This is an exhortation because the author wants us, him included or her included, the author wants the community of believers to carry out a behavior, which is pay more careful attention, and it has a warning. If we don't pay careful attention, we'll drift away. Drifting away. Drifting away is almost passive. It's almost passive. It's something that happens and you don't even, you may not even realize it. You know, you just forget to tie that boat on the dock and you fall asleep. When you wake up, you say to yourself, where am I? How did I get here? And it is things that we do that cause us to drift away, but we may make so many rationalizations and so many excuses for those things that they don't really seem that wrong to us. And those are the things that are causing us to drift away. And pretty soon we're so far from where we should be that we need to think about getting back. Is my favorite word? Yes, neglect. Is neglect rejection? Yes, no, a little bit of both. What do you think? Is neglect and reject the same? Passive rejection. Okay.
Neglect implies lack of attention. That's what you're back to paying attention. Neglect something. I can neglect my dog because I don't want to feed it better than water. I don't like that.
One is active, the other is passive. Yeah. Yeah, you water the dog. You say, open your mouth, boy. What happens when you neglect something? Describe neglect. Describe neglect.
Isn't neglect and drift away similar?
They are. They really are. Yeah. There you go.
You've forgotten about it.
Yeah, you just, and every time you get a chance to do it, you say, I don't have time right now.
Right. You pay
Yeah.
attention to other things rather than pay attention to what you're neglecting.
You're paying attention to other things rather than paying attention to what you're neglecting.
You don't really forget it. It comes to mind, but you just don't do it.
You just don't do it for whatever reason.
Neglect.
You see that guy back there? That guy was my best man.
Hey! 26 years ago?
That's right. Whatever. Don't make me try to remember in front of my wife.
What's his name? We celebrated when LAX had no parking.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. We were there.
Neglect is like a boyfriend that comes in your house. You don't keep an eye on him. It's come practice will do something stupid.
Do you have
I
daughters?
have 4 daughters. And 3 boyfriends are gone.
You know what? I don't think you neglect much.
No, there you go. Woo.
We don't get to carry guns down here like you do.
Yes.
I was thinking in our house, if we don't put out water for the cat every day, he's an inside cat, I would think he would die because he gets water no other way. He doesn't
Right.
find it.
He can't turn the faucet
That's
on
severe
or
neglect.
go in the toilet. Yeah. No, neglect can have severe consequences. That's true.
Yeah, it's just like owning a house. If you neglect it,
What does that mean?
Roof's
Neglect.
gonna leak.
Okay.
Wallpaper's gonna be falling off the wall.
Mhm.
Paint's peeling off.
You've been to my house.
Those are signs of neglect.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen all at once. It takes time. It's a process.
At my house, I am more apt to neglect than Sylvia is. Sylvia pays much more attention to those details than I do. What the reason might be, I don't know. There's a number of reasons for it. She has a higher priority on those things than I do.
I was just gonna say it's
You know?
priority.
No, you guys don't tell you guys it's secret.
She has a much higher priority on those things than I do. Now, what happens if we don't put a high priority on the word that we've heard? What happens? We'll drift away. It's an automatic process. You don't have to necessarily do anything except neglect. Just don't pay attention to it for a little while. Just make something else more important. And that will happen automatically.
There's a simple story of a Scottish preacher who went to a friend's house and was talking with him about why aren't you attending church? And he gave all sorts of excuses. And then in the process, the preacher went over to the fireplace, grabbed a coal while the conversation was going on, set it on the hearth, separate from everything in the fireplace, and then just sat back down and continued the conversation. And after a while, he said, "You're like that coal." And he saw the coal losing its light.
Right. that certainly can happen to us. Now, one of the aspects of this letter may be that the author was writing to people who may have been under some kind of trial or some kind of testing or some kind of persecution or suffering, and it was those circumstances that was causing them to want to go back to the former way in order to find some comfort. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, but when you separate yourself from that so great salvation, when you separate yourself from that word delivered by the Son, whatever the circumstances may be, when you separate yourself, you're like that coal that Gene was just talking about. You start to lose your fire. You can't have fire if you're not stoking yourself. And that's what Paul says to who? To Timothy, right? Fan the flame. Fan the flame. Because a fire doesn't stay lit otherwise. Daniel, you were getting ready to say something.
You're anticipating just like that old saying, use it or lose it.
That's right. That's right.
For Jim Morrison. Light my fire.
Gene, you had something?
When you get to the service this morning, if you haven't been,
Gene has the floor. Gene has the floor.
all right. He's talking about weeping with those that are weeping, and rejoice with those who rejoice. And many times in our growth, we are so self-centered, we are drifting, that we are a stumbling block to those who might not drift away had we not done our drifting.
Right. Exactly. That's true. That's true. That's why I want to really emphasize we. Salvation is personal in the sense that it happens to a person. Okay? But that's the only way that it's personal. Okay? It's not private. Okay? It wasn't designed to be private. You are born into a family. You're not born in a vacuum. There's no in vitro salvation in the church. Okay? You are born into a family. You are automatically part of a community. And so as part of the community, we have that responsibility to, build each other up. First, Bob, in the back there. Right. Yes, and the author has various sections of exhortation because the author does not want this to become some kind of academic exercise in theology. The author wants to keep bringing this home by saying we must do this, we must do that, we must avoid this, and that's throughout the letter, and we'll see that as we go. Right.
I was just going to say this. You touched on it. It's a personal salvation, and it's a relationship with Christ. It's like a relationship with your spouse. It's close. If you take a relationship with your spouse for granted, you can have problems in your marriage. We take our relationship with Christ. Oh, I was saved,
Right.
and move along, and then forget about reading the Word, etc. You're going to have problems.
You're going to continue to have.
Yeah, it's a relationship you need to maintain.
Yes, Dan.
It's like all the things that you did when a young man and a guy get together, all the things you did to get to that marriage point.
Right.
Then when you get married, it's like, okay, I got him, I got her.
Yeah. You relax about it.
The tummy's going out and this and that. And
I said I love you once.
they forget, yeah. It's like, wait a minute, because you did that, you still got to keep doing that. You're married.
Right.
And then you wonder why a lot of people end up in divorce because
You're not
I
maintaining
got
a
my
relationship.
person now, I can just kick back.
Yep.
I can't.
Yeah, you have to keep working at this
That person's
relationship.
mind's gonna drift.
You
And you're gonna see that guy or gal over there, hey, they're still taking care of something, still, I want that. What happened to what I had?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. You have to maintain. And if we don't maintain our relationship with Christ, what happens to us? We drift away. He doesn't drift away. But we drift
You see
away.
something more.
We see something more enticing. Exactly right. Exactly right. Okay, that's the first section. Now we move on to another section. And what's the transition word?
Now.
Yes. You're right.
If you want to, or you can skip it. Verse 3, the word escape. What do you think that means in that context? How do they actually escape?
escape? What are they escaping from? One of the things is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the things is this appropriate, reward for disobedience. In other words, if the word delivered in time past, which was just pieces and parts, brought an appropriate reward for disobedience, then how will we escape if we neglect this word delivered by the Son? Okay, so he's just saying that we also are subject to an appropriate disobedience, an appropriate punishment, or he calls it reward, retribution is another good word, for neglect of this salvation. So we will not escape from discipline, whatever you want, whatever other synonym you want to use for that. Another thing is in terms of the word deliverance. Okay, there's no way that you can hope to escape from circumstances brought on just because we live in a sinful world if you don't try to live according to the word. If you let yourself drift away, there's no escape from your circumstances for you. So there's two, I think, applications there for that. Somebody said the transition word was for, and where is it? Verse 5. So here's another section, and what happens all of a sudden? Can you tell there's been a transition? It changes from we to he. Now there's another actor all of a sudden. So now we can tell, can you see what I mean? Can you see that there's two sections here? So this is one section here, and the next section starts with verse 5. You see a transition in the pronoun use to he. So who's the actor again? Okay. Okay, so now we have another section. For he has not put the world to come, of which we speak, in subjection to angels. So let's come back over here. We're in chapter 2 now, and we have another section here in our outline, and this is an exhortation to heed. And now we have another section which starts through 9, you say? Yeah, okay. Why? Because there's another transition word. Okay, sure. What does 5 through 9 deal with? Anybody want to just take a stab at it? 5 through 9. What's the subject? Okay. Okay. There's a slight problem here with the author's argument. If we look at it, we might discover that this author may have had a problem with people understanding, well, okay, he's greater than angels, but he became a man. I thought men were lower than angels. So if he becomes a man, isn't he then lower than an angel too?
Because he maintains his deity.
Okay.
He's still God.
But God gave man judgment of the world.
And he didn't give that to angels. Okay.
So man is over angels.
Right. Okay.
And angels are ministering spirits to man, therefore.
Okay.
Subordinate to man.
Okay, in that sense. Okay. Did everybody hear that? Number 1 is that angels are servants to man according to the will of God. Okay? They are ministering spirits to those who will receive salvation. Okay? So that's one aspect in which angels are actually below men. And then the other point is that the creation was not put in subjection to angels. It was put in subjection to whom? Man. Okay? So those are 2 ways right there. So he deals with that. What also, some people say that Jesus was just a spirit being. How does this help to deal with that? How does this section 5 through 9 help to deal with that? He can't be a spirit and be human. Okay, so now we're beginning to see some of the tension of the Son of God being both God and man at the same time. Yes.
Verse 9 says that, go back to the previous point, that Jesus was made a little lower than the angels. So, in some sense, for that period of time, that Jesus was lower than the angels.
Does anybody have a translation that says for a little while lower? What?
We do see him who was made for a little while lower.
What's the significance of saying for a little while lower and a little lower? Yeah, he doesn't stay that way. Okay, it's temporary. This particular phrase can be translated in both ways, and there's just as many translations that say a little lower as there are that say a little while lower. I kind of prefer a little while lower for that very reason, because it was temporary. He's not concerned really. He's not. The author is not concerned really right now with the issue of Jesus' position below the angels. He's concerned right now that this voluntary humiliation of Christ was for a particular purpose, which is exposed in this very section. What is that purpose? Okay, death for what reason? Okay. Christ pays the penalty for man by becoming a man. And Bob pointed out that this is the one, but you have to take it out of context. That's why it's so important to look at the book in toto, to just take these a slice at a time and make sure that we have all these, linguistic and grammatical and textual ducks in a row, so that we know we're not lifting these out of context. Yeah, out of context it says that Jesus became a man, and so the human mind would say, oh, he's lower than an angel now. Okay? But that's not the case. The author has gone through great pains to make sure that we know that Jesus, A, is not an angel, B, is greater than angels, C, is second only, if he's second to anyone, only to God the Father himself. Of a very same essence as God the Father, in some way that we can't fathom. He's the very radiance of God's glory. None of this can be said about any angel. No angel was the agent of creation. No angel is the sustainer of the universe. No angel came down to be a man. God did not offer aid to the angels. He offered aid to men through Christ. And so, if you take it in context, there's no way that you can possibly use this section to prove that Jesus was a created being. But of course, out of context, you can prove almost anything. Okay, let's just identify the next section, and then we'll stop there. What's the next section? 10 through 18, and that section starts with the transition word for. Okay? For. So there's 10 through 18. So far we have 2, 1 through 4, 2, 5 through 8, or maybe 5 through 10. It depends. I kind of believe that 9 is a minor transition, that 5 through 10 all hangs together on the same subject. 5 through 10 also gives us the reason why Jesus had to become a man. The euphemism for becoming a man, or the synonym for becoming a man, is who was made a little lower than the angels, because we were just told that man was made a little lower than the angels. Man is not yet crowned with glory and honor. Man does not, obviously, does not have all things under his feet. But in verse 9 we see Jesus crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for every man. So I kind of believe 5 through 10 all goes together. 5 through 9 all goes together. And then 10 through 18. What is the subject matter of 10 through 18?
Captain of our salvation.
Okay. Captain of our salvation. What else? What else do we have in 10 through 18? Again, Christ's humanity. Christ our brother, right? Exactly. Christ not ashamed of us. I think that might be, a really good one for us maybe to take away with us this morning, is Christ not ashamed of us. Okay? I don't know about you, but, there might be family members in my family that I might be ashamed of. That's your brother? Kind of deal. But Christ is not ashamed of us. And the author gives us several texts to show us that he's not ashamed of us. And again, the author goes back to the Old Testament, Psalm 22:22. I will declare thy name to my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing praise to thee. Isn't that kind of an awesome thing to try to imagine? Can that help us in our worship time? Do you think? Christ there, praising God with us, in the midst of us. Psalm 8:4. What is man that thou art mindful of him, the Son of Man that thou visitest him? He used that reference in the previous section that we looked at. And then Isaiah 8:17 and 18. And one shall say, I will wait for God, who has turned away from the house of Jacob, and I will trust in him. The author of Hebrews only uses that one little portion, I will put my trust in him. Behold, I and the children which God has given me. Isaiah is saying that about his own children. That's the context of that particular reference. But this author uses that to show that Jesus is not ashamed of us. He's proud of us. We are God's gift to Jesus. And we need to think in those terms. We will bolster up our confidence if we don't drift away from some of these concepts that the author of Hebrews is giving us. Well, I'm ready to stop there. Anybody have anything else they want to contribute?